This video is sponsored by Squarespace.
All right, guys, hope you guys are doing amazing. So this is the Sony Alpha A1, a camera that I'm sure you know because it's freaking amazing. But this is a camera, I'm sure you guys have been there. You open it up, you got this brand new camera in there, you're digging through the features, looking at all these new dials and stuff like that are absolutely amazing. You're going through it, even features that I knew were going to be in this camera. You start using them in real life, hearing that 30 frames per second, and it's just mind blown on some of this stuff right here. But then there's always that realization, sometimes a couple days later, where you start looking through something in the menu and you can't find it anywhere, and you don't know if it's there and you just can't find it, or maybe the feature is gone with it, and you start Googling, hey, does a Sony A1 have this feature on it? And you find out, no, it doesn't, and you're kind of disappointed at first. So there was a lot of that with the Sony Alpha A1. So I kind of want to go through these 10 big surprises for me, stuff that were not in the initial spec list or that just wowed me as soon as I started using it, and a couple kind of negative things that I thought were missing on this camera that really kind of surprised me on that one as well. So let's kind of dig in to these new features on the Sony Alpha A1. All right, so first up is the buffer, and as somebody who owns an A7R III, the buffer on that camera is just insanely slow. It's 48 megapixels, so still technically lower than this, but I think it only holds 75 compressed RAW files and like 26 uncompressed RAW files, and it took like a minute to clear the buffer if it was completely filled. So I was really apprehensive with a 30 frame per second camera that's shooting 50 megapixels. That just doesn't seem as going to be good for Sony buffer clearing right here. But thankfully, this is that 30 frames per second. So fast, this never gets old. All right, so I've got over 40 images in the buffer right there, and I am clearing now. So I would say that you're clearing about 10 images every second, which is a massive improvement from before. And also the buffer is clearing as you're shooting now too. So you just don't fill it up as fast. It shoots like 170 images. I'll post the exact specs for that one. Depends on if you're shooting compressed or uncompressed RAW. The 30 frame per second spec is only gonna work in compressed RAW, but we do have compressed, uncompressed, and also a lossless compressed now, as well as all your JPEG options and HEIF and everything like that. So more on that in a little bit though. But if you are shooting UHS 2 cards instead of a new CF Express, it does slow down dramatically. I would say it's like 5 times slower. So I was clearing about 2 images every second in that. So for sure, if you want the highest end buffer speeds on that one, which are insanely good for this camera, you definitely are gonna want those CF Express Type A cards. I'll include some links in the description for all the gear that I use for this, and you can check those out there. So before we get on to that next one though, big thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. If you guys need a new website, or maybe you're like me, you had one, but it just didn't have the ability to sell products or manage galleries or calendars, go ahead and check them out. They have all of those features, and it's completely free to go get started. Let's start with a template. You can add in new sections so easily. You can modify those, add pictures in. You can actually search for pictures on Squarespace, so it's really nice for being able to get started if you don't have anything ready to go yet. And you can even add animations and do crazy awesome stuff to really next level your website there. They have some absolutely insane tools for photographers and videographers, custom galleries. You can actually password protect them, share them with clients as you want. So go ahead and check them out, guys. It's completely free to get started on that. When you do want to go live with your site, use my coupon code LearningCameras and you can go live with it today. So one of the downsides I discovered pretty quickly after is, even though you have that absolutely amazing 30 frames per second, you don't quite get that with every lens on there. The good news is that most of Sony's newer lenses are on that list, especially the lenses you would probably want for this, like the 100-400, 400 millimeter, 70-200, things like that. So the telephoto lenses are all pretty new. However, there were a lot of lenses that I actually own that do not shoot that full 30 frames per second on that one. There are 18 lenses total right now that do support it, so pretty much everything else though does not. This is the 35mm 1.4 G Master, which just came out, so this obviously does, but I was pretty surprised the 85mm 1.4 G Master is not on that list, so that was kind of a downside on there. I also use this Zeiss 55mm 1.8 quite a bit. Again, not a lens I'd probably use at 30 frames per second, but another lens that's very popular, great lens that will not support it. And kind of the bigger one is any third-party lenses are only going to be rated to 15 frames per second max, and that's going to depend, even native mount. So this is the Tamron 70-180 f2.8. I use this a lot instead of the 70-200. And this is going to be a lens that will not give you that 30 frames per second. So if you're someone who has been using these Tamron lenses or other native mount by Sigma or anything like that, you will not get the full specs on this. And even some of Sony's lenses, even this G Master 85, will not support that. So you're gonna be looking at 15 to 20 frames per second max on most of those other lenses right there. And then performance is gonna kind of vary by lens. It might be a little bit slower if you're continuously focusing and tracking, just because the lens might not be able to keep up with the camera on that one. All right, so we gotta talk about this shutter mechanism. And yes, there's a lot that's changed that was in the spec sheet, like you can shoot with flash at faster shutter speeds and things like that. One thing that I did not see in there, which was a big surprise and a pleasant one. Let's look at the shutter. Look, it's closed.
Oh my God, it's closed. Oh my gosh, they did it.
Finally.
We did it, Joe. We did it.
Is that the shutter completely closes over the sensor so you can change your lenses without getting dirt and anything in there. As somebody who lives in Florida and shoots at beaches and sand all the time, this is massive. Sony, come on, put this in every camera. This is insane, and you don't have it in pretty much every other camera except I think the A9 II has it. They need to do this in every camera. It's simple, let's do it. It's amazing. The other is that you can actually, and this was in the spec sheet a little bit, so you can actually fine tune your shutter speed to decimal points. And the main focus of this was photographers who are shooting electronic shutter in maybe bad fluorescent lighting or something like that can match the frequency of those lights right there. But this works in video, and if you're a video shooter, I shoot cars a lot, and the headlights are always a problem for me. So being able to match that is going to be huge. I'm gonna use this all the time. One thing that's interesting though is you cannot change it to be like 1/48th of a second. I thought you would be able to match shutter angle. So if you're shooting at 24p, you cannot shoot at a 1/48th of a second. That was kind of a little bit of a downside, but being able to fine tune it in there and hopefully alleviate a lot of that is going to be huge for video features. There are some video cameras that can do that, but they tend to be on the pro side and much higher. And I think Panasonic also does it as well, but nice to see in this camera and a huge advantage for the shutter. All right, so while we're talking video, video was another huge surprise for me, and in a very positive way. So we have this 8K camera, and we all knew that it records 4K up to 120, but one of the big things that I was always worried about is you have an 8K sensor and you need to record 4K. How is the camera getting rid of all of those pixels? It wasn't oversampling, which would increase the quality to 4K. And it wasn't able to do that because we just have too many pixels. It would overheat. No camera really does that. The R5 does it in 24p only, and it overheats like crazy in that mode. So what was Sony going to do to give us amazing 4K performance on this camera? And I don't know exactly what they're doing. I imagine they are pixel binning, but because this camera is exactly 50 megapixels, it is able to do a 2x2 pixel bin, which gets it to about 12.5 megapixels. And that is going to allow it to get exactly the resolution that we need to be able to get 4K video without having to do some kind of subsampling or throwing away pixels that we don't need or line skipping or anything like that. So whatever Sony is doing in here, 4K looks amazing up to 120 frames per second. I had no issues. It is just as sharp as the A7S III, which I'm using to record this with. And in some cases, it actually looked better. So this is an absolutely insane 4K camera. It was a huge surprise for me to just have it looking this good. And even in low light, it was holding its own. So up to 6400 ISO, no problem. And even 12,800 was very usable. That's insane for a camera that's 50 megapixels. And then obviously we have that 8K, and then even 1080p is available on this one. So having all of that in our video was an absolute huge advantage. Now the next one that worried me quite a bit was going to be overheating. This is an 8K camera. We all remember the R5 saga, and yes, that camera overheated on me a lot to the point that I really don't use it for video just because of that. This camera though, I had high hopes because of the S3, but then with this 8K sensor and 4K 120, I just didn't know how I was going to pull that off without overheating. Sony did say that it would record 8K and 4K 60 at about 30 minutes. Happy to report I've been able to get way longer than that. So I think in 8K I recorded over 42 minutes nonstop. And then one of the biggest surprises is that if I actually stopped recording for just like 2 minutes and then started up again, I had no problem recording another 15 minutes and even longer on there. So you could record an entire wedding indoors in this camera in 8K. It probably would not be an issue. And if you pause the camera for a little bit and allow it to cool down for just a minute or two, you can get even more recording. So if there's something that you're doing that has some breaks in it, you can absolutely record 8K. In 4K 60, I was able to record over an hour and 10 minutes indoors, no problem on this camera. And again, as soon as I just hit stop and then started it again, just 2 minutes later, I was able to record another 30 minutes before my card eventually filled up. So yeah, this camera is performing very well in overheating, except when I start to take it outdoors, and this is an issue I've always had with Sony cameras, they do not do well for me in direct sunlight outside. I live in Florida. We shoot a lot of weddings on beaches. We shoot weddings on golf courses all the time, a lot of them in direct sunlight. It is winter here. Now in Florida, that's like a mid-80s type of thing, but this is our winter. So this is pretty cool on here. And as soon as I took it outside in direct sunlight, I dramatically dropped. So 4K 60, I got around 30 minutes of recording. In fact, the R5 actually lasted a few seconds longer to me on this shoot. And if you were to actually shoot this in the summer, I think this will die a lot faster. Again, that's with overheating warning set to high. So this camera is allowing itself to heat up even more. So not great outdoors, amazing indoors. And that's kind of typical for me with Sony cameras on there. So overall, very good. But yes, if you're somebody who's like me and shooting outdoors a lot in direct sunlight, especially when that summer temperature comes along, you might not get those amazing record times. What was crazy is that every time the sun would come out, the Sony A1 would almost immediately turn on the overheating warning, and then when the clouds would move over, the overheating would completely turn off. So it was the sun itself that was killing it, not the ambient temperatures. So if it wasn't for these clouds moving over every few minutes, there's no way the camera would have even made it these 30 minutes. So let's talk about memory cards for a second, because this is actually kind of a big deal on here. So the camera now uses either UHS-2 memory cards, which are like these right here. This is a V90 spec card, up to 300 megabytes per second. So this is one of the fastest UHS-2 cards you can get right now, or CF Express Type A. And this is only Sony's card right now, and the largest capacity you can get is 160 gigs. And this is my biggest issue right here with the cards, is that I quickly realized you cannot get more than 160 gigs. And if you want the V90 spec and you want any kind of name brand card, right now 128 gigs is the largest capacity. Now that's kind of an issue when you're shooting 50 megapixels at uncompressed RAW, 100 megabytes per image on those. So you're talking about 1,500 images before you're filling these cards up. And also, when I do load these cards up into my computer, it only says that 148 gigs are free. Plus remember, there's no small RAW at all. So you can shoot compressed RAW, but it will still be a 50 megapixel file. So if you're shooting something like weddings or sports in RAW, you'll be changing cards way more often. And these cards are insanely expensive, especially compared to the CF Express Type B cards, which Sony also makes, but that the Canon R5 uses, which are actually faster, cheaper, and you can buy them up to 500 gigs. So Sony didn't choose to do that. They chose to go with these. The advantage is you can use both cards in the same slot, so you can kind of navigate how you want to, but do keep in mind these will fill up insanely fast. And to get those buffer speeds, you're gonna want these CF Express cards. You can actually shoot 8K on these standard SD cards, which is actually pretty crazy. But if you want to be able to shoot the all I modes, you're going to need to have the CF Express Type A cards, and they are pretty dang expensive and they will fill up insanely fast. Now, another thing we need to talk about is cropping. Cropping on this camera is absolutely amazing, whether you're shooting videos or photos. So if you are a photo shooter, being able to use an APS-C crop and still end up with over 20 megapixels, which is what like a 1DX is absolutely crazy. So you can record either full frame or crop and get amazing results. Also for video, this is even a bigger difference because video is oversampled with over 5K. So the video in crop mode looks amazing. Being able to crop in for video and still have amazing 4K recording is great to have. I use it all the time, especially with weddings and stuff like that, to be able to get some better reach on it. Or if I use a prime lens like this, I can basically swap between it being like a 35 prime prime or a 50mm prime just by hitting that crop mode and get amazing results. Either way, it's actually even a little bit more detailed in that APS-C crop mode because it is oversampling. So something to keep in mind there. But yes, if you are an APS-C shooter or just want to be able to crop in a little bit more in the camera, these modes work insanely well. There was another kind of negative discovery though, and that is that this camera does not have clear image zoom. And if you're familiar with Sony cameras at all, this is the ability that in video mode, it can do a digital crop basically and allow you to get a little bit further into your image, and it actually is better quality than doing this in post. So whatever Sony is doing here would be an awesome option. I'm very surprised that Sony doesn't have more options on the crop side on this. For example, in the APS-C crop, which is a 1.5x crop, I believe, they are still using 5K, over 5K recording to record a 4K. So they could have done a pixel for pixel readout at maybe a 1.7x crop and still give you amazing 4K, or in 1080p, have like a 2.5x crop or whatever the math comes out to and giving you a pixel for pixel readout on that. There are cameras that do allow you to do that. This one does not. So Sony is not taking full advantage of this resolution by giving you either those kind of pixel for pixel crops or allowing clear image zoom. I was really surprised it wasn't in here. Something that I don't use it all that often because it does reduce the quality. But if you're in a pinch and you want to get a little bit further, it is a great option, but it is not available on this camera. So again, if you guys have not seen our review on the Sony A1, go ahead and check it out. It's absolutely awesome. We had a wide body Lamborghini on there, so we had some fun with that one. So go ahead and check that out. These are my favorite things for the Sony A1 right now. Feel free to mention below if you had any surprises for yourself or if you're pre-ordering the camera, hit me up. Hit me up on IG as well. I'll be hanging out. Hope you guys are doing amazing, and I'll see you soon.